Well, good talk. Today's daf is daf Kuf Mem Ches in Baba Basra, as we get into more deeper areas of the rules of Shchibira. Now, before we start, we're at the seventh line on Kuf Mem Ches Amar Aleph Iboilahu. But before we start that, let's again review the Mishnah back on Kuf Mem Vavam and Beis. Let's look at the Mishnah. Shchibira, if it's Shchibira, we don't have to say it inside. I'll say it outside. If he gave away everything, the Shchibira who was on his deathbed gave away all his assets, and then he recovered. Everything is canceled. There's no more gifts because he only obviously meant to give it based on the fact that he was about to die. But if he had known that he would have lived, he wouldn't have done this. So therefore, he gets it all back. However, the Mishnah said, let's say he left something for himself. He gave away 99% of his assets, but he left one little piece of land for himself, enough to live on, whatever. As we'll talk about that later on. He left a little bit for himself. Then, even if he survives, give it. Now, when Shchibira gives something away, whatever he gives, a little bit, a lot, everything, and then he dies, it's given. That's it. You don't need a kinyan or anything like that. But if he survives, then there's a difference. If he gave away everything, he gets it back. If he didn't give away everything, he gave away 50%, 60%, whatever he gave away, then that stands because obviously he kept something for himself. He meant to give that even if he was about to survive because he didn't give it all away. Okay, now we'll talk about today's more. We'll say, okay, what happens if he gave away, let's say, 60% to one person, and then he stopped. Later on, he changed his mind and decided to give the other 40% to somebody else. Now he's given away the whole 100%. But when he gave away the 60%, he didn't mean to give the rest of it away, right at that point. He said, well, maybe I'll keep the 40%. So then the 60% is a gift, even if he survives. Even though now he's given away everything at the end of the day. But when he gave away the 60%, he didn't mean to give it all away, just some of it. That stands even if it survives. We're going to see that today. So it's important to remember. If he dies after giving it away, whatever he gave away, 10%, 100%, whatever he gave away is done because he died. If he survives is the issue. See, if he gave it all away in one shot and then he survives, he gets it all back. If he gave it away partially, he only gave away partial, then he meant to survive. He meant I'll keep the other part for myself. Then it's a gift even if he survives, as long as there was a kinyan. The recipient made a kinyan. So if he gave it away 60%, 80%, 90%, 95%, he gave it 95% away, but he kept 5% for himself, and the 95% guy or guys made a kinyan, then even if he survives, it's a valid gift, and he can't go back on it. Okay, iboilu. Now, by the way, if he survives, meaning he's okay, as we'll see also today, another thing we mentioned once before, if he's a shchimira, and while he's a shchimira, he gave this away, and then he changed his mind, and he said, no, I'm not giving it to you, I'm giving it to you. He can change his mind all he wants. What do we have today with wills? What's the first thing they say in a will? This will cancels all the other wills, right? Because you can change your mind while you're alive. You could change your mind because you're giving it away at death or a minute before death, right? But till die, you could change your mind. You didn't give it away yet. So while he's a shchimra, he can keep changing his mind. That's good. The Gemara's lashon is daitikim bevatel is daitiki. The will of the will or the offering, the bequest of a dying person can cancel the previous ones. But if he survived and now he's okay and he gave away 60% while he was a shchimira and the guy made a kinyan, you can't go back on that. So says the Gemara, boilu. What happens? He said this. Let's say I'm giving the tree. All he had was a tree. He gave the tree to one person, and he gave the fruits on the tree to somebody else. Now, the question over here is this. Mi shayir makom pere olo. Has he kept over for himself? Since he divided it up, he didn't give the whole tree. He didn't give everything to one person. He gave the person to Reuven, he gave the tree, and he gave the peres to Shimon. Has he left for himself, listen carefully, has he left for himself the branches where the apples grow? Because the tree, you're going to him. I'm not giving you everything, I'm giving you the tree. The fruits are going to him. Has he kept for himself the branches where the tree where they grow? Meaning he's kept it for himself, and it's a partial gift. He's kept something for himself. So if he survives, the tree goes to Reuven. The fruits can go to Shimon if they're here. Talking about we're not going into the issue of makneh shalom. Let's say the fruits are on the tree, but if he kept them for himself, let's say the tree now doesn't produce anymore? Can he get the branches, the part where the things go? Has he kept that for himself? Imtim Salomer, and so the Rashbam explains that it goes through all arichas. We're talking about a shchimir right now. The Rashbam says. Others say it's talking about bar. We're not talking about that. He says that is he left the place where the tree where the apples the stems where the apples grow from, the branches, and he's got that. So basically he's left something for himself, and if he's left something for himself, it's a matna shchivira b'miktzas. He's partially given away. He hasn't given away everything, and therefore it's a gift even if he survives. Now he's back to 100%. He's going to the gym every day, comes to shul. He's 100% healthy, but he gave away the tree. Can't go back on that. But why? Because he's kept something for himself. Oloshar, not imtim salomer la'achar lavishir. What happens if you say, well, when he gave his stuff away to somebody else, he gave the tree to one and the fruits to somebody else, he hasn't kept anything for himself. He's basically giving it all away. And if he's giving it all away, what does that mean? He hasn't kept anything for himself, and if he survives, he gets it all back. Okay, fine. What about Shiur la'atzmo? If he left something for himself. And what's the girsa in the Bach? You see it here? I can't even find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. Imtim salom al-achar lavishir, Shiur la'atzmo ma'u. And some take out the chutz b'ros, if he takes that out. I guess from imtim salom al-achar lavishir, Shiur la'atzmo ma'u. Let somebody kept something for himself. What do you say there? Some of the girsa chutz, our Gemara says la'atzmo chutz miprosa, but that seems doubling up. Shiur la'atzmo, kept something for himself, ma'u. Meaning he said this, I'm giving you the tree, but not the fruits. The fruits he kept for himself. So now would you say if he keeps the fruits for himself there, he is keeping the branches from which they grow? That's how the Gemara raises the question. So Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says like this. In the first question, if he gave the tree to one and the fruits to another, lo havishir, he didn't lavishir makom, the place where the fruits grow from, he's not leaving that over. He didn't reserve that for himself. Why? Because he basically said, you get the tree, you get the fruits, and he didn't keep anything for himself, and therefore it's a matna shchimira bakulo. He's giving it all away, and if he survives, he'll get it all back. What about dekel echad b'shayir perosav lefonav? What happens if he says? So he said. Even if you say that's not considered, he didn't leave anything, he didn't reserve anything for himself. But if he said Dekalech, he gave the tree to Ruvain, B'shai Parasul Fanav, and he kept the fruits for himself, then Shire Mokum Pere. Then he did leave over the place of the fruits, and therefore it's a matna shchiver b'miktzas because he kept over the branches for himself. And if he survives, Reuven gets the tree. Reuven gets the tree because it's a matna shchiver b'miktzas. My time. What's the reason why there's a difference if he kept the fruits for himself or if he gave them to Shimon? By time of buying up Mashai, a person for himself keeps more. A person always wants more for himself. If I'm giving away, the man's dying, he's giving away the tree to Reuben and the fruits to Shimon. So you could say, well, he gave it all away. It's all good. But if he says I'm giving the tree to Reuben and he's leaving the fruits for himself, he means to include the branches also. And that's how Rashbam explains the Gemara. Rashbam says, so if Rashbam's gear was chutz meperosiv, except for the fruits, right? Since originally he gave the guy the fruits anyway, the guy gave the tree anyway. I'm just giving you the tree. He didn't give him the fruits. He didn't have to say, listen, he didn't have to say the extra words of chutz meperosiv. He meant to say, since he said these extra words, then it means he's leaving over the place of the fruits. The fruits themselves is not karka. We said so far that if a person leaves over some karka for himself, the shchimira, then it's a matana b'miktzas, and the matana, if assuming the recipient made a kinyan, would get it even if the shchimira survives, even if he recovers. But over here, right, since he said chutz merosim, he's trying to leave something extra for himself, ikashik karka kolshu matasa matana, even if the man survives. That's what Rav Nachman says. Now, that wasn't the case where he said simply, we're talking about a shchimira was giving stuff away. Amalei Rav Abba, back in the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Amalei Rav Abba Rav Ashi, Anana Rav Shimon Lakish Masina. We learned this whole question not in a case of a shchimira giving away a tree and a fruit and fruits, to which Rav Nachman said, well, if he kept the fruits for himself, he means to keep part of the branches also, and therefore it's shire karka kolshu, and therefore it's a shchimira It's a matnas shchibra b'miktsas, which means that Reuben would keep it even if the shchibra survives. I learned the question on a different issue entirely, on a question of a bari, but we can apply it to this case too. What did I learn? We had this before in a mocher masninala. The Rav Shapiro said as follows: if number one, the seller sells a house to a purchaser to somebody else for Omerlo, and he said, when he sells him a house stam, and there's an upper story with its own balcony and its own balustrade, it's got its own fence around that. So he said to him, when he sells him a house stam, it doesn't include the upper story. I sold you only the main house. Let's say he says on the condition that I'm going to leave the upper story is excluded. I'm keeping the upper story for myself. Do you tell Yonash? No. That's what Shimon Lakish said. Now, Reb Tzvi explained that, as we'll see. Reb Tzvi explained Reb Shimon, Rish Lakish, say, oh, you know what? When he kept the extra, when he says the upper story wouldn't have been included anyway, but the fact that he said, I'm not including the upper story means he wants something extra. It's not just the upper story that I'm keeping. I'm also keeping the projection rights that when I sell you the house with the chatzer, not only do I have the upper story, but if I want to put a clothesline or something or some projection from the upper story onto your chatzer, you can't claim that I'm using your airspace. And that's what, because since I said except for the upper story, I mean to include more. That's what we mean here. We're gonna apply this. Now that's a case of a regular bari. Person is a buyer and a seller. The seller sells to the buyer, I'm selling you the house, except for the upper story, which wouldn't have been included anyway. But by using those extra words, except for the upper story, he means to include even more. And the same way, we're going to apply it here too. He could have just sold him the tree. The fruits wouldn't have been included anyway, because you sell a tree, the fruits there are not necessarily included. But since he said besides the pears are not included, he means to keep something extra for himself. That part extra. What's the extra part? The branches from which the apples grow. And then on this question of the selling the house without the upper story, now what happens if he sold the house to one person and he sold the upper story to another person? There are two purchasers, 1 and 2. He sold the house to number 1 and he sold the upper story to number 2. Shiur, is that by selling the upper story to another person, does that also mean that there's a reservation? You're not getting, I'm selling you the lower story and the upper story is going to number 2. Does that mean that there's a reservation there? And not just the upper story is going to him, but the upper story and its airspace. You could stick out a projectile from the upper story onto the chutzir, which number 1 bought. Is that olo? In other words, the question was asked, the iboilu was not the way we started on our Gemara about a shchibmira who's giving away a tree to one and a fruit to another, but it's talking about a bari who sold a house to one and the upper story to somebody else. By selling the upper story to somebody else is that leaving over something or reserving something? Imtim salomer that's not leaving anything over. Sold the house, story number 1 to person number 1, story number 2 to person number 2. What happens if he sold him the house? Like we said, I sold him the house besides the upper story. That I'm keeping myself. On this, Rav Nachman said, this is what Rav Abba said on Amar Aleph. Rav Abba said to Rav Ashi, I learned this discussion on the case of the house. Rav Nachman, and he said, that's not leaving anything over. I sold story number 1 to number 1 and story number 2 to number 2. But if I sold him the house number 1, except for the upper story, right? Like, that is a shiur. That is leaving something over. Like Reb Zid explained, Rish Lakish, the Amar She'im Ratza L'Hotzin Bazizin. If I wanted, I'm keeping the upper story for myself. It wouldn't have been included anyway. If you ask a lawyer, if I sell you one story, is the second story included? He would have said, no, the second story is not included. It's like a separate apartment. But why did I say, no, I'm not including the second story? To tell you that I have an added advantage, that if I want to put a projection, some sort of a pole or whatever out from that second story, and it overhangs your chutzir, I'm allowed to do that. Alma, keeping the Shiur Diuta, since I said I'm reserving the upper story, Malkum Zizan Namishamer, I'm also keeping the place for the Zizan, the projections that stick out from that upper story. And he takes the parentheses, has Mashal takes it out, but that's the idea. And we're applying the same thing here by a Shchimera. He's left that over also. So that's the idea over here. When I sell you something, and what's the nafkamina? The big nafkamina is that I keep something for myself, not just in the case of the tree, keeping something for myself. What do I get out of the branches? I can cut down the branches, but the real difference is that we're talking about a shchibirah. Means if I kept something for myself, it's a matna shchibirah b'mixas. I didn't give it all away. We'll talk tomorrow about selling it, but if I didn't give it all away. If I didn't give it all away, the kinyan that I gave away is valid even if the shchibirah survives. That's the point. Okay, now we come to another issue. Amar Rav Yosef bar Yommi. We're in the third line of the wide lines in the Gemara. Let's say he wrote everything, gave everything to other people. Rowan, if he machalik means he was giving it all away. Gather around the bed, boys. I'm giving this to one, this to two, this to three. I'm giving it all away now. And then he died. Kind of cool. They all acquire it, right? Omad, if he survives, close the cool, and he can go back on all of it because he gave it all away in one shot. He said, okay, boy and the son number one, or he can give it to whoever he wants. I'm giving this one to my chavrusa in the morning. I'm giving this part to my chavrusa in the afternoon, and this one to my chavrusa at night. He gave it all away, and then he survived. He can go back on all because he was giving it all away in one shot. Im benimlach, listen carefully. Nimlach means this. Changed his mind. What does that mean? He felt like I said before he gave away 60%. And then he thought about it. He said, listen, boys, I'm giving 60% of my assets to my morning chavrusa. That's what he said. And he stopped. He stopped talking. Later on, he said, you know what? I'm going to give the other 40% to my second seder chavrusa. In benimlach, and then he died. He said in the morning 60% to number one, 40, and then in the afternoon he said 40% to number two. In other words, he sort of changed his mind. Kanu kulan. If he dies, they all get it because he died. He died after giving 60% and 40%. Ahmad, if he survived, now if he survived, we said, remember, he can go back, right? He can go back. He gets it all back. Yes, but he didn't give it away at one time. If he gave it all away at one shot, this. Even if he gave it away 100 different people or 20 different people or one person, makes no difference. If he gave it all away and then he survived, he gets it all back. But if he gave away only partial, and he survived, the partial stays. It's a valid kinyan. So over here, what happened was in the morning he gave 60% to one person. Okay. Then in the afternoon, he changed his mind and says, I'm going to give away the other 40% now also to number two. So, and then he survives. He can go back on only on the second one. Why? Because in the second one, when he gave away the other 40%, he had nothing left. So then he was planning on dying. Now he survived. So he can get back the second, because when he gave away the second portion, the other 40%, he had nothing left. So the 40% he can get back because he survived. But the 60% that he gave away in the morning, before he changed his mind, when he was only thinking of giving 60% away, that was a shchimiras matna shchimira b'mixas, which is valid, and that stands even if he survived. So he explains it this way. It's not simply, he kept something for himself. You have to look at it. If he originally gave 60% away and then he stopped, he wasn't going to give away anymore. That means that's a matana shchimira, and that stands even if he survived. When he gave away the other 40%, and then he survived, he gets that 40% back, because when he gave away that 40%, there was nothing left. Okay. Says Gemara, how do you know that he changed his mind? Maybe he was thinking about, let me see, 60% to number one. Let me see. Well, hold on a second. Okay, I'll give the other 40% to him. Maybe it was all part of one giving away. So the whole thing was, he was really giving it all away. Just took him a while to come out with it. And therefore, he should get everything back if he survived. Maybe he was thinking about, okay, I'll give Ruvain this amount. Yeah, let me think for a minute. Give me a few minutes. And then he was thinking about what he's going to give to Shimon, etc. So he was giving it all away, and therefore he should get everything back if he survived. The answer is, so maybe maybe he was thinking about it, what he's going to give to this person, and then he gave it, but he's really giving it all away in one shot. The answer is we assume in a regular case, he first thinks about what he's going to do. He doesn't give it out in shots. He thinks about what he wants to do. and then he says it. So since in the morning he said 60% to number one, and then he stopped, break for lunch, then he stopped, or give him more tubes, put some more stuff in his tubes, whatever. So since he stopped, that means that he really didn't want to give away any more at that point, and therefore the 60% is valid even if he survives. Amar Bacha bar Manyumi, this is another son of Manyumi. Before we had Amar Rav Nachman, we had before Amar Rav Yosef bar Manyumi. This is Rav Acha bar Manyumi, Amar Rav Nachman. Again, when they said it, the name of Rav Nachman, that's usually the halacha. Rav Nachman was the posek. Amar Rav Nachman, Shchimira Shekasav Kol Nechasav La'acherim. Ba'amat, he wrote away, he gave away everything, and then he survived. Ain't a choser. He can't go back on it. Now that goes against what we just said. We said if you give away everything and you survive, you can get it all back. So he says, you know what? As in a regular case of a shchimira that gives all his assets away, and then he survived, he can't go back on it. It's like a matna shchimira mixus. Well, how does that jibe with our Mishnah? Why he says chashina and shemi yesh lo nechasim miniches? Maybe he has something else. He gave away all his property he has here in Yerushalayim, right? And then he survived. You say he can't go back on it. It's like matna shchimira mixus. Why? Why? Because maybe he has property. Who knows? In Yehupitzville. He has some other property there. Why? Our Mishnah said that if he didn't leave any karka for himself, the matana is not mukuyam. He gets it all back. So how do you say over here, even if he gave it all away, he can't get it back? What do you mean if he gave it all back? You say, and he survived, he can't get it back. Why not? You said in our Mishnah that he does get it back if he didn't keep anything for himself. And you're saying, well, maybe he had property somewhere else. So how do you explain our Mishnah? Right? If he didn't leave anything over, right, then he gets it all back. How does that work out? How do you explain the Mishnah? Some have different gears to say nechasai elu. When he said, I'm giving away all my assets. See, our Mishnah says, I'm giving away everything to Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. I'm giving everything to them. Then he gave everything away clearly, gives it all my assets wherever they may be. So if he survives, he gets it all back. We know that he has nothing else. It's known that he has nothing else. Rashbam says over here, not the Rashbam, the Bach. Gami Khan, Raya, Lamashikosu Tosus, Lael, the El, that he says there, the Efsha Adam, She'emo Karka. It's possible a person has nothing else. We know that it's possible that a person has nothing else. So if he gave away everything else here, you don't assume he has karka, but not everybody has karka. So our mission that says if he gave everything away, he gets it back if he survives, is speaking about where he gave away everything when he said, I'm giving away everything, or we have a Kabbalah, we have a chazaka that he doesn't have anything else. But in a regular case, when a man just gave away, I'm giving away I'm giving my house and this and this and this and this, and then he survives, it's valid. He can't get it back because we assume he has other stuff. Again, if he keeps anything for himself, then the gift is a gift, even if he survives. Now we come to the real tough question of the day. As we said before, the daitikim vetasai. As long as he's a shemrai, he keeps changing his mind until he dies. Until he dies, he can, like we said, this will cancels all the other wills, right? This will, all the previous wills. Right? I hereby cancel all the wills that I said till now. Iboilu. Chazar mixes have chazar v'kula olo. A man gave everything, let's say, to Reuven, and then he said, I'm giving 100% to Reuven of my assets. Then he said, you know what, I'm going to give 20% to Shimon. Now that means he retracted what he said. First he said, I'm giving 100% to Reuven, and then he says, I'm giving 20% to Shimon. What does that mean? Does that mean that he retracted everything that he gave to Reuven? Or, listen carefully, I'm giving 100% to Reuven. Then he says, I'm giving 20% to Shimon. Does that mean that Reuven gets nothing, that he retracted everything that he gave to Reuven? And now he's only giving 20% to Shimon and the other 80% he's keeping for himself? Or does he mean, no, I first said I'm giving 100% to Reuven, but now I want to give 20% to Shimon. So Reuven gets the 80% and Shimon keeps the 20%. That's the question that he's raising. Giboy Chazar makes us when he retracted partially. Have a chazar b'kul is as if he retracted totally. Oh, lo. Tashma, listen to this case from a brisa. He says, listen, first he said, Kul Narisha, I'm giving 100% to Reuven, first guy. Umutzas l'sheni, then I'm giving partial, 20%, let's say, to Shimon. Sheni kana, Rishon lo kana. second guy gets his 20%. The first guy gets nothing. Now, my law, are we speaking about B'Shames? He died. In other words, he said 100% to Reuven, 20% to Shimon, and then he died. So it says Shimon gets the 20%, Reuven gets nothing. What does that show you? That Chazara b'mikzas, Chazara b'kula. Since I retracted on the man who gave it away, first he said 100% to Reuven, then he said 20% to Shimon. Was he retracting everything he gave to Reuven, or only 20% to give to Shimon? Since he says over here, I'm giving 100% to Reuven and 20% to Shimon, and if he died, right, he says over there that the second guy, Shimon, gets the 20%, Reuven gets nothing. Doesn't that mean where he died means he retracted everything? Says low. So that's a proof that if you retract partially, you retract the whole thing. Says more low. Bisha Amad. It's speaking over here. You know what happened over here? He survived. So what's the question over here? He survived, and therefore, Reuven, when he gave it to Reuven, it's possible that Reuven gets the 80%. But since he survived, since he survived the issue. We say the second guy got a partial. The first guy originally got everything. When he gave everything to Reuven, that means that if he survives, he's going to get it back. He's going to get it back. So when he gave everything, it could very well be that the Chazar b'mikzas is not Chazar b'kula. What's speaking of here? It's speaking about where he survived. Now, this doesn't hold water, as we'll see. There's an obvious question on this. But he says it's speaking about where he survived. If he survived, so what happened? Shimon, if he survived, Shimon gets his 20% because that's only a partial. Reuven doesn't get anything because when he gave it to Reuven, he gave him everything. And when you get everything and the man survived, it all goes back. So the Gemara says, Hochanam mistavra, it's mistavra that this is a case of Sha'amad because of the Sefer. The Midiktani Sefer, the Sefer over there says of that Brisa, again, the Reisha said 100% to Reuven, and then he said 20% Shimon. The Sefer says, Miktsas l'misha, I'm giving 20%, let's say, to Reuven, V'kul l'sheni, and the rest of that I'm giving to the second guy. Listen carefully. I'm giving partial to the first guy, and the rest goes to the second guy. And then Rishon Kana, we say, the first guy gets the 20%, the second guy doesn't get anything. Okay, now, again, that's how I'm explaining the Sefer. The Rashbam is a little bit funny, but the Rif and the Rashi, the Bach brings down, explain that he didn't retract the first guy. He said to Reuven, I'm giving 20%, and then he gave Shimon the rest of it. The rest of it to Sheni. Rishon Kana, it says over there, the first guy gets it, because he gave him 20%, Sheni lo kana. Yeah, if you say it's speaking about there, that the Mishnah this Bryce is speaking about where he survived, Mishum Hachi Sheni lo kana. That's why the second guy doesn't get anything. Why? Because when he gave everything to the second guy, he had left nothing for himself. He didn't leave anything over. He didn't reserve anything for himself. And therefore, if he survived, it goes back to the Shibma, to the former Shibma, it goes back to him. But the first guy, when he gave him 20%, that was only b'mikzas, so that stays. If it's when he died, they should both be kona. If he gave 20% to Reuven and Shimon got the other 80%, and then he died, then they should both be kona. Why do you say that only the first guy gets it and the second guy doesn't get it? So therefore, this is a proof we're speaking about B'Sha'amad. It's not speaking about B'Shameis at all. The whole Bryce is speaking about B'Sha'amad. So it's not speaking about a case of where he died, and therefore you can't prove the question of if he retracted on partial, did he retract in the whole thing? Amar V'Yemer Ravashi, that's not a proof. For Tavinam Shaman, say it's speaking about where he survived. Again, look at the Reisha. The Reisha happened where he said, I'm giving everything to Reuven, and then he said, I'm giving 20% to Shimon. And you say that's speaking about when he survived. And therefore, the 20% Shimon gets, Reuven, he got everything, gets nothing, because when he gave him the 100%, there was, and he survived, he gets, the Shimon gets it all back. But if you say that if you retract partially, you retract the whole thing, Chazar Bakula, so I understand, okay, why the second guy gets it. Why? Because he originally gave 100% to Reuven, then he changed his mind, he gave 20% to Shimon, and now what? And now when he gave 20% Shimon, he retracted on all of Reuven's. So it makes sense, okay, he retracted all of Reuven's, he gave it the 20% to Shimon, right? 20% Shimon. Now he survived. Shimon only got 20%, so that 20% stands even if he survived. But if you say, listen, if you say that if you retract partially, you don't track the whole thing. So when he gave 100% to Reuben and then he gave 20% to Shimon, he didn't mean to retract all of Reuben's gift. He didn't mean to retract it all. He meant just to say, of the 100% that I originally gave to Reuben, I'm going to give Shimon now 20%. But Reuben keeps the 80%. Shimon gets the 20%. So if that's the case, then in the Havik Machalik, then he's giving everything away. Nobody should get it. And nobody should get it. Because if he gave it all away and then he survived, why do you say Shimon should get it? If you say what? That the Chazar Mikdas is Chazar Bakula. So it means when I gave away everything, when he gave everything away to Reuben, and then he gave 20% to Shimon, he meant to say Reuben gets nothing. Okay, Reuben gets nothing. Shimon gets 20%. Fine. So even if he survived, Shimon gets the 20%. Even if there was survival, Shimon gets 20%. But if you say the Chazar Mikdas Lav Chazar Bakula, that when he gave away 100% to Reuben and then 20% to Shimon, that means to say he didn't retract everything. He just retracted 20% of Reuben's share and gave that to Shimon. But the other 80% stands. So if that's the case, he gave 80% to Reuben, 20% to Shimon. Nothing was left over. And then if he survives, he should get it all back. Nobody should get anything. And therefore, since you say and yet Shimon gets 20%, that shows you that Chazar Mikdas is Chazar Bakula. Chazar Mikdas have Chazar Bakula. If he retracted, again, if he gave 100% to Reuben and then 20% to Shimon, he meant to retract all of Reuben's gift, gave Reuben nothing. Shimon got 20%. And the ratio, therefore, Mishkachas Lo, that part of the first part of the Brisa, that case, Bein Shemeis, Bein Shamad. Whether the Shemira died, Shimon gets 20% and Reuben gets nothing, or whether he survived, Shimon gets 20% and Reuben gets nothing, because he retracted the whole gift to Reuben.
Does it make a difference with the time? In other words, he said 100% to Reuben at 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock he says 20% to Reuben.
Right. So there, it doesn't really make a difference as long as the second gift was retracted the first one. Because since Daitiki, before we said if he gave everything away to, let's say he gave 80% to one, and then he gave 20% to the other, right? So there you could say it was partial. The first one was a partial gift. If he changed his mind in between, there was a time lapse in between, then you say that the first one was a partial, and that stays even if he survived. But here we're talking about where he changed his mind. He originally said 100% to Reuben, and then he changed that by saying 20% to Shimon. So the question is he saying when he says 20% Shimon, is he still leaving Reuben with 80%? Or is he saying, no, Reuben is canceled. I said Reuben gets 100%. No, I'm giving 20% to Shimon, and therefore I'm canceling Reuben's totally. Then makes no difference if he and that's the halacha, that Reuben's is canceled totally. So whether the Shemira dies or survives, either way, Shimon gets the 20% and Reuben gets nothing. And the Seifa was the other way around, where he first gave Reuben 20%, and then of the balance, he gave the other balance, he gave that to Shimon. Seifa l'mishkachas lo ela b'shamad. That will only work out if he survived. Why? Because if he gave 20% to Reuben and 80% to Shimon, and then he died, they both get everything. Must be that he survived. And since when he gave 20% to Reuben, that's all he did. He just gave 20% to Reuben. And then later on, he gave the other 80% to Shimon, and then he survived. Shimon won't get anything because when he gave it to Shimon, that was the end. There was nothing left over for himself. But when he gave Reuben the 20%, he did leave over 80%. And therefore, Reuben's gift remains if he survived. But if he died after giving away everything, it makes no difference if he gave away partial or everything. From whatever man gave away while he was a shchimera, and then he died, that gift stands. Iboilu. Another question. So we've said that if he gave away everything and then he survived, gets it all back, as long as he gave it away at one shot. I'm giving 100 gifts. Here's on my list of donations. I'm giving everything away. Everything he's giving away, no matter if it's a one person or a million people, he's giving it all away. And then he survives, he gets it all back. What happens if he didn't give it away to people? He was makdish it to the base of mikdash. Then he stood now, and then he survived. Do you say, well, since it's hegdish, he means to give it away even if he survived. Gave it all away. What are you going to live on yourself? I'll live on bituach lumi. I'll live on the soup kitchen or whatever, right? Since for himself, he wants to keep something for himself. Man doesn't want to run out of his money, like people say, right? But we say that he outlived his Social Security, or he outlived his savings. man doesn't want to be in that position. So even if he gave it to Hegdish, he only meant to give it to Hegdish on the condition that he's going to die. But if he survived, he gets it back. What about Hifkir Kon Chassid, where he says, listen, I don't want anything. He was mafgrid, right? Now, he's giving away to poor and rich people. He's removing himself from it. I don't want this money at all, giving everything away. Gomer Makti, therefore he's giving it away even if he survived. Only giving it away as long I'm mafgrid if I die. But if I survive, he really means to keep it. What about even more? Even if you say that in those cases he means to keep it for himself, but if he's giving away to the poor, where it's a mitzvah, stuck here you say, since it's stuck, he certainly wants to give it. He doesn't want to retract. What kind of person gives away tzedakah and then wants it back? If he gave it all away to tzedakah, he meant to give it wholeheartedly, and he doesn't want it back even if he survived. Since it's for himself, he doesn't want to be left destitute, and therefore he only meant to give it away as long as he dies, but not if he survived. That's the question. All these questions take Ustam. Amar of Sheshes, 2 lines from the bottom of the page in the Gemara. When he says you give it away, we said in the Mishnah, matna shchimira, whether it's matna shchimira b'mixus or matna shchimira b'kulo. When he gave it away, what lashon does he use when he's giving it away? Now, he said again, he doesn't have to write it down, but you could write it down. Meaning, we said that divrei shchimira, the words of a shchimira, it's as if they're written down and handed over, as long as they're Adam who saw it. There could be contention. What did he say on his deathbed? But if he gives it away, it's all given. What lashon's work? What is considered a gift? If he says Yito, I want Reuben to take this and Shimon to take that, or Yiska, let him merit getting this, right? He'll be Zoka in these Chasim, or Yachzik, let him take a possession, let him show ownership, or Yikna, let him acquire. Kul Lashon Matanein. Those are all those words, whichever lashon he uses is considered a gift, and therefore the rules apply of Shchimira, Matana B'Mixas, or Matana B'Kula. If he dies, it's valid. If he survives, Matana Shchimira Mixas, the Matana worked anyway. If he gives it all away, then he gets it back. He gets it. They're all Lashon Matana. Masistan on the Bryce one, Af Yachson Yaris. Even if he uses a lashon of inheritance, Yachson is lashon of inheriting, Yaris is lashon of inheriting, Baroy Liarsha. If it makes sense. In other words, if you're giving it to a stranger and you're saying, let him inherit me, it's not inheriting. Inheriting is only from a next of kin. So if he says, if it's Baroy Liarsha, Rabbi Yochanan Baroka, remember Rabbi Yochanan Baroka says, and we paskin that way. A man has 3 sons. Let's say nobody's a Bechor. If there's a Bechor, he can't take away the Bechor's share. But let's say he had 3 sons, and he says, I'm going to give everything to son number 2. I want him to inherit everything, even a lashon of Yerusha. Rabbi Yochanan Baroka works because he's fit to inherit him. If he has a son and then he has a daughter, and he says, I want my daughter to inherit everything, that doesn't work because he's not royally Yarshan, because since there's a son or daughter, the son is supposed to get it. So in a case where it's royally Yarsho, even a lashon of Yaris, if the Shchimera says, I want son number 2 to be Yachas or Yaras or lashon of inheritance, that works according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. But the first lashon works for everybody. Yitol, Yiska, Yachzik, Yakna, you can give it to stranger wherever you want. There are other questions of other lashonos of gift that we'll deal with tomorrow when we pick it up from here. The last 2 words on the page, Boilu, other lashonos that are not as clear. What's the halacha there? We'll pick it up there tomorrow, Mr. Have a good day, everybody. Call to.